The dust devil caught Delilah Owen just as her vision went black, and her knees buckled beneath her on the rutted road outside Tascosa, Texas. And the last thing she registered before unconsciousness claimed her completely was the thundering of hoofbeats and a man's rough voice calling out an alarm. The scorching August sun of 1882 had been beating down mercilessly for 3 days as she walked, her water skin empty since yesterday morning, her lips cracked and bleeding, her threadbare dress clinging to her gaunt frame. She had been walking since Amarillo, nearly 60 miles behind her now, fleeing a marriage arrangement her uncle had made with a cattle baron twice her age, a man known for burying 2 wives already under mysterious circumstances. Samuel Pierce had been riding fence line for the Double Creek Ranch when he spotted the figure stumbling along the road, weaving like a drunk, but moving with the desperate determination of someone running from something terrible. He spurred his buckskin gelding forward, reaching her just as she went down hard, her body hitting the packed earth with a sickening thud that made his chest tighten with concern. He was off his horse before it fully stopped, dropping to his knees beside her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he turned her over and pushed the tangled mass of dark hair away from her face. She was young, probably not more than 20, with delicate features now marred by sunburn and dehydration, her breathing shallow and rapid. Samuel had seen men die from exposure in this unforgiving country, and he knew she did not have much time. The nearest town was Tascosa, still 8 miles west, and his ranch house was 12 miles in the opposite direction. He looked at his horse, considered his options for maybe 3 seconds, then made his decision. He gathered her into his arms, surprised at how light she was, how her body seemed to weigh nothing despite being dead weight in his grasp. She was burning with fever, her skin hot enough to feel even through his worn chambray shirt. Samuel stood carefully, adjusting her position so her head rested against his shoulder, one arm supporting her back and the other hooked beneath her knees. He looked at his gelding, who watched him with intelligent brown eyes. "Well, Buck, looks like you get a break and I get a long walk," he murmured, grabbing the reins and starting west toward Tascosa. He could have draped her across the saddle, could have ridden double, but something in the way she lay so vulnerable and broken in his arms made him reluctant to jostle her any more than necessary. Besides, Samuel Pierce was 26 years old, 6 foot 2 inches of lean muscle forged by hard ranch work, and he had walked farther distances in worse conditions. The first mile passed with agonizing slowness, the sun hammering down on his shoulders, sweat beginning to soak through his shirt and darken his vest. Samuel kept his eyes on the horizon, on the shimmer of heat waves rising from the road, and forced himself to maintain a steady pace. The woman in his arms stirred occasionally, murmuring words he could not quite catch, her head turning against his chest as if seeking comfort even in her fevered state. By the second mile, his arms were beginning to ache, not from her weight but from holding the same position, from being so careful not to drop her or shift her too roughly. He adjusted his grip slightly, bringing her closer against his chest, and she made a small sound that might have been relief or pain. Samuel found himself looking down at her more frequently, studying the curve of her cheekbone, the way her dark lashes lay against her sunburned cheeks, the surprising fullness of her lips despite their cracked condition. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer, his voice rough from his own thirst. He had given his water to Buck before starting the walk, knowing the horse would need it more. "Must be something terrible to have you walking yourself to death in this heat." The third mile brought a slight breeze, but it offered no relief, just pushing hot air across the landscape like the breath from a forge. Samuel's shoulders were screaming now, his arms trembling slightly with the sustained effort, but he did not even consider setting her down. There was something about her that called to a protective instinct he had not known he possessed, something that made stopping feel like abandonment, like failure. She opened her eyes briefly during the 4th mile, unfocused blue eyes the color of a winter sky, and they fixed on his face with an expression of such bewilderment and vulnerability that his heart squeezed in his chest. Her lips moved, forming words without sound, and then her eyes rolled back and she went limp again. Samuel quickened his pace slightly, worry gnawing at his gut. He had lost his own mother to fever when he was 12, had watched her slip away over the course of 3 agonizing days, and he would be damned if he let this woman die in his arms without a fight. "Stay with me," he said firmly, his voice taking on a commanding tone he usually reserved for breaking horses. "You hear me? You stay with me. We're getting you to Doc Morrison, and you're going to be fine." The 5th mile found his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step, his throat so dry he could barely swallow, his muscles burning with sustained effort. Buck plodded along beside him, occasionally nudging Samuel's shoulder with his nose as if offering encouragement. The woman's breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more regular, and Samuel chose to believe that was a good sign rather than a prelude to something worse. He thought about his life as he walked, about the ranch he had built from nothing after his father drank himself to death 5 years ago, about the solitary existence he had carved out for himself in this harsh country. He had sworn off women after Emily Henderson broke their engagement to marry a banker from Santa Fe, had decided that the company of his horse and his cattle was sufficient. But there was something about the weight of this stranger in his arms, the trust implicit in her unconscious state, the fierce need to protect her that had seized him, that made him question that decision. The 6th mile brought them into the outskirts of Tascosa, past the scattered adobe houses and corrals that marked the edge of town. A few people stopped to stare, and Samuel ignored them all, his entire focus narrowed to the white clapboard building at the center of town where Doc Morrison kept his practice. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon now, but the heat remained oppressive, unrelenting. Mrs. Callahan, the doctor's housekeeper, saw him coming and ran ahead, bursting through the door with shouts that brought Doc Morrison himself out onto the porch. The doctor was 60 years old, with a shock of white hair and keen gray eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Samuel and the woman in his arms and began barking orders. "Get her inside, 2nd room on the left. Margaret, cool water and clean cloths now." Samuel carried her into the examination room, and only then, with the doctor gesturing toward the narrow bed against the wall, did he finally set her down. His arms felt strange without her weight, almost numb, and he had to consciously straighten his fingers, wincing as blood flow returned with painful prickles. He staggered slightly, catching himself against the wall, his legs threatening to buckle now that the sustained effort had ended. "How far did you carry her?" Doc Morrison asked, already working to remove the woman's boots, checking her feet for injury. 8 miles, give or take," Samuel replied, his voice coming out in a croak. "Found her collapsed on the road outside town. She has been walking in this heat for days, I reckon." The doctor looked up sharply, his eyes reassessing Samuel with new respect. 8 miles, without setting her down. Did not seem right to put her on the horse, Samuel said simply. She was already in bad shape. Doc Morrison shook his head wonderingly, then returned his attention to his patient. "Well, son, you likely saved her life. She is severely dehydrated and sunburned, probably has not eaten properly in days, but nothing that rest and fluids will not fix." You, on the other hand, look like you are about to fall over. Margaret will get you some water, and then you need to sit down before you collapse yourself." Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to stay and watch the doctor work, to make sure she would truly be all right, but his legs made the decision for him. He sank into the chair Margaret Callahan pushed behind him, accepting the tin cup of water she pressed into his hands. He drank slowly, letting the liquid ease his parched throat, his eyes never leaving the woman on the bed. She looked impossibly small lying there, impossibly fragile, and yet she had walked 60 miles from Amarillo. That took a kind of strength that went beyond the physical, a determination and courage that commanded respect. Doc Morrison was sponging her face and arms with cool water now, murmuring instructions to Margaret about preparing broth and setting up the sick room for an extended stay. "She going to make it?" Samuel asked, hating the way his voice betrayed his anxiety. "She will," the doctor assured him. "Thanks to you. Another hour in that sun and it would be a different story. You got a name, son, Samuel Pierce. I work the Double Creek Ranch east of here." "Well, Samuel Pierce, you did a fine thing today. A heroic thing, if I am being honest." Doc Morrison pulled a light sheet over the woman, tucking it around her carefully. "You got any idea who she is?" "No, sir. She tried to say something when she came around briefly, but I could not make it out." "Well, she will tell us when she wakes up, I expect. For now, she needs rest and fluids. You are welcome to stay if you like, but it might be morning before she is coherent." Samuel knew he should go, should head back to the ranch, should tend to his own needs and responsibilities. But something kept him rooted to that chair, some invisible thread that seemed to connect him to the unconscious woman on the bed. He settled back, ignoring the protests of his exhausted muscles. "I will stay a while, if it is all right with you, Doc." The old physician smiled knowingly. "Suit yourself. Margaret will bring you some supper directly." The evening passed slowly, the room cooling as the sun finally set and blessed darkness fell over Tascosa. Samuel dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time the woman stirred or made a sound. Doc Morrison checked on them periodically, spooning water between her cracked lips, changing the cool cloths on her forehead, nodding with satisfaction as her color gradually improved and her breathing steadied. It was near midnight when her eyes finally opened and stayed open, blinking slowly in the lamplight, confusion clouding those remarkable blue eyes. Samuel leaned forward instinctively, his hand reaching out to hover near hers without quite touching. "Easy now," he said softly. "You are safe. You are in Tascosa at Doc Morrison's place." Her eyes found his face, focused on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible, ruined by thirst and exposure. "You carried me." "I did. I remember." Her hand moved, trembling, until it found his where it rested on the edge of the bed. Her fingers were cool now, no longer burning with fever, and they closed around his with surprising strength. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die out there. What is your name?" Samuel asked, his own hand turning to properly hold hers, thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "Delilah Owen." She swallowed hard, wincing. "I need to tell someone. My uncle, Jacob Owen in Amarillo, he is trying to force me to marry Gerald Blackthorne. He is a terrible man. His wives both died under suspicious circumstances, and I heard him and my uncle talking about how I would not live long enough to inherit my father's land trust, how they had already agreed to split it after I was gone." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she had been holding them in so long that they had built up pressure, needing release. Samuel felt his jaw tighten, anger kindling hot in his chest at the thought of men plotting so casually to harm this woman. "So you ran," he said, "and it was not a question." "I waited until the house was dark. took what little money I had hidden, and I walked. I knew if I tried to take a horse they would chase me down immediately, but I thought if I went on foot, they might assume I had headed for the train station or gotten a ride with someone. I thought I could make it to Tascosa, maybe find work, somewhere they would not think to look right away. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over, tracking down her still reddened cheeks. But the heat, and no water after the first day, I just could not go any farther. "You did fine," Samuel said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You are here now, and you are safe, and I promise you neither your uncle nor this Blackthorn character will lay a hand on you while I have breath in my body." The words surprised him even as he spoke them, the vehemence behind them, the absolute certainty. He barely knew this woman, had spent the last several hours watching her sleep, and yet he meant every word with a conviction that ran bone deep. Delilah searched his face, seemingly finding whatever she was looking for there, because some of the tension drained from her frame and she relaxed back against the pillows. "I do not even know your name." "Samuel Pierce. Most folks call me Sam." "Samuel," she repeated softly, as if testing how it felt on her tongue. "That is a good, strong name, biblical, my mother's choice. She was a religious woman." She died when I was 12. Fever took her." He paused, then added, "That is why I could not leave you out there. I have seen what heat and thirst can do, and I just could not walk away." Something shifted in Delilah's expression, a softness entering her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "You carried me 8 miles. Doc Morrison told me when I first started coming around, though I did not fully understand until now. 8 miles in that heat, without ever setting me down. Did not seem right to do anything else," Samuel said, suddenly self-conscious, aware that he had not released her hand and she had not pulled away. "I think you might be the best man I have ever met, Samuel Pierce," Delilah whispered. And then exhaustion claimed her again, her eyes drifting closed, though her fingers remained entwined with his. Samuel sat there in the lamplight, watching her sleep, feeling the calluses on her palm that spoke of hard work, the delicate bones of her hand in his larger one, and he knew with absolute clarity that his life had just changed irrevocably. He had carried her 8 miles, but somehow in doing so, she had taken hold of something in him that he had thought Emily Henderson had broken beyond repair. Doc Morrison found him like that when he checked in an hour later, still holding her hand, his head tilted back against the chair in sleep, his face peaceful despite the awkward position. The old doctor smiled, pulled a blanket over Samuel's lap, and left them to their rest. Morning brought the sound of boots on the porch and raised voices in the front room. Samuel came awake instantly, his hand going to the pistol at his hip before he fully registered where he was. Delilah was awake too, her eyes wide with fear, her face pale despite the sunburn. "That is my uncle," she breathed. "I would know his voice anywhere." Samuel was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between the bed and the door, his hand resting on his gun butt. A moment later Doc Morrison appeared, his expression apologetic, followed by 2 men. The first was clearly Jacob Owen, tall and thin with a weak chin and cold eyes. The second was broader, older, with the cruel mouth and calculating gaze of a man who viewed people as property. "There she is," Jacob Owen said, relief and anger mixing in his voice. "Delilah, thank God. We have been searching all night. You gave us such a fright, wandering off like that." "I did not wander off," Delilah said, her voice stronger than Samuel expected given her ordeal. "I ran away from a forced marriage to a man I know to be dangerous." Gerald Blackthorn stepped forward, his expression crafted into lines of concern that did not reach his eyes. "Now, my dear, I understand you have been subject to some wild stories, but I assure you, I have only the most honorable intentions." Your uncle and I have come to an arrangement that will benefit everyone, particularly you." "Benefit me right into an early grave, you mean?" Delilah shot back, sitting up despite the obvious effort it cost her. "I heard you both talking. I know what you have planned." "You were delirious, exhausted," Jacob Owen said dismissively. "You misunderstood a conversation about estate planning. Now you have caused quite enough trouble, and Mr. Blackthorne has been very patient, but it is time to come home and fulfill your obligations." "The lady says she is not going," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of steel that made both men focus on him properly for the first time. "And who might you be?" Blackthorne asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "The local doctor's assistant." "I am the man who carried her 8 miles to save her life," Samuel replied evenly. "And I am the man who is telling you she stays here until she is well enough to make her own decisions about her future." "You have no authority here, Cowboy," Jacob Owen sneered. "She is my niece, my ward, and she comes with us now." "Actually," Doc Morrison interjected smoothly, "as the attending physician, I have the authority to say that Miss Owen is in no condition to travel. She nearly died yesterday, and moving her now could have serious consequences. She stays in my care for at least a week, possibly longer." Blackthorne's expression darkened. "We could always involve the sheriff. I am sure he would have something to say about a young woman being kept against her will." "By all means, let us fetch Sheriff Wallace," Doc Morrison said pleasantly. "I am sure he would be very interested to hear Miss Owen's accusations about a murder plot. He takes such things quite seriously." The two men exchanged glances, and Samuel saw the calculation there, the weighing of risks and benefits. Finally, Blackthorne forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Very well, Doctor. We will give the girl time to recover from her ordeal and her delusions. But I expect her uncle will have legal remedies at his disposal when she is well enough to face reality." They left with poorly concealed threats and dark looks, and Samuel did not relax until the sound of their horses had faded down the street. He turned to find Delilah shaking, tears streaming down her face, and he was beside the bed in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "They will come back," she sobbed against his chest. "They will find a way to force me. Uncle Jacob has papers showing he is my legal guardian until I turn 21, and that is still 8 months away." "Then we have 8 months to figure this out," Samuel said, stroking her hair, surprised by how right it felt to hold her, to comfort her. "And you are not alone in this, Delilah." "I meant what I said. They will not take you while I am here to prevent it. But you cannot stay here forever. You have a ranch to run, a life. You cannot put everything on hold to protect a stranger." Samuel pulled back enough to look into her eyes, his calloused hand cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness. "First, you are not a stranger anymore. Second, the ranch can spare me for a while. And third, I am beginning to think protecting you might be the most important thing I ever do." The intensity of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice, made fresh tears spill from Delilah's eyes, but these were different, born of relief and wonder rather than fear. "I do not understand why you would do this for me." "Neither do I fully," Samuel admitted honestly. "But from the moment I saw you collapsed on that road, something in me just knew you were important, and every hour since has only made that feeling stronger." Doc Morrison cleared his throat diplomatically from the doorway. "Well, now that is settled, I need to examine my patient and get some proper food into her. Samuel, why do not you go get yourself cleaned up at the boarding house, maybe send word to your ranch and come back this evening. Miss Owen will still be here, I promise you that." Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to plant himself in that chair and not move, but he recognized the wisdom in the doctor's words. He needed to make arrangements, needed to ensure his cattle would be tended, needed to get his thoughts in order. He squeezed Delilah's hand once more. "I will be back before supper," he promised. "I will be here," she replied softly, and the look that passed between them made Doc Morrison smile knowingly. The next week fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and completely natural to Samuel. He spent his days in town, helping with odd jobs to earn his keep, sending his ranch hand Martinez a telegram with instructions for running the Double Creek in his absence. He spent his evenings in Doc Morrison's sitting room, talking with Delilah as her strength gradually returned, learning about her life in Amarillo, about the parents she had lost to cholera when she was 16, about the uncle who had seemed kind at first, but had shown his true colors once he realized the value of her father's estate. She was intelligent and funny, with a sharp wit that emerged as she recovered, and a strength of character that Samuel found himself admiring more each day. She asked about his life too, listening with genuine interest as he talked about building the ranch, about the satisfaction of working the land, about his dreams of eventually expanding the herd and maybe buying the neighboring property. "You love it," she observed one evening, her eyes bright in the lamplight. "The ranch, the land, all of it. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it." "I do," Samuel admitted. "It is hard work, lonely sometimes, but there is something honest about it. You put in the effort and you get results. The land does not lie or scheme or betray you." "Unlike people," Delilah said quietly. "Unlike some people," Samuel corrected, reaching across the small space between their chairs to take her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past days. "But not all. Doc Morrison is a good man. Mrs. Callahan treats you like her own daughter. And I like to think I am reasonably trustworthy." Delilah laughed, the sound like music. "Reasonably trustworthy. Samuel Pierce, you carried me 8 miles in scorching heat and have spent over a week protecting me from men who wish me harm. I think you go a bit beyond reasonably trustworthy." "Well, when you put it like that," Samuel grinned, then sobered. "We need to talk about what happens next, though. You are getting stronger every day, and once Doc Morrison clears you to leave, your uncle will try again." "I know," Delilah sighed. "I have been thinking about it constantly. I could try to find work somewhere, maybe as a schoolteacher or a seamstress, but Uncle Jacob could still claim guardianship and force me to return. The only way I would be free is if I were married or turned 21, and I cannot wait 8 months in hiding." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Samuel felt his heart hammering in his chest, felt the rightness of what he was about to suggest, even as the logical part of his brain told him he was insane, that he had only known this woman for a week, that proposing what he was about to propose was reckless beyond measure. But then he looked at her face, at the intelligence and courage and vulnerability there, at the way she looked at him like he was something precious, and logic did not matter anymore. "You could marry me," he said quietly. Delilah's eyes went wide, her lips parting in shock. "Samuel, you cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." He shifted from his chair to kneel beside hers, still holding her hand, his other hand coming up to cradle her face. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but Delilah, I have never been more certain of anything. From the moment I picked you up off that road, something in me just knew. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and the thought of your uncle forcing you into a marriage with that monster makes me want to tear something apart. Marry me, and you will be free of him. Marry me, and I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Samuel," Delilah breathed, tears spilling over again, her free hand coming up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "You barely know me. What if you wake up in 6 months and regret this? What if I am not who you think I am? Then we will figure it out together, Samuel said firmly. But I do not think that will happen. I think you are exactly who I think you are, and I think I could spend a lifetime getting to know you better and never get tired of discovering new things. I am not asking for a marriage in name only, Delilah. I am asking you to be my wife, truly, completely. I am asking you to take a chance on a cowboy who is probably 10 kinds of fool for falling in love this fast, but does not care, because he has never felt anything this right in his entire life. You love me. The words came out as barely a whisper, wonder and disbelief warring in her expression. I do, Samuel confirmed, absolute certainty in his voice. I love you, Delilah Owen, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. She was crying in earnest now, but she was also smiling, and then she was pulling him closer, her forehead resting against his. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Pierce, because I think I might be falling in love with you too, and I cannot imagine trusting anyone else with my future the way I trust you. Samuel kissed her then, gentle and careful, mindful of her still healing lips, and it felt like a promise, like a beginning, like everything he had never known he was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. We should probably tell Doc Morrison, he said. We probably should, Delilah agreed, but neither of them moved, content for the moment to simply exist in the bubble of happiness they had created. When they did finally emerge to share their news, Doc Morrison merely smiled and said he had been expecting it, that he had never seen two people more clearly meant for each other. Mrs. Callahan cried happy tears and immediately began planning a small ceremony for the following week, insisting that Delilah needed a proper dress, and that she knew just the seamstress in town who could alter one of her own wedding gowns from 30 years ago. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Samuel made a trip back to the Double Creek to prepare the house for a wife, cleaning corners he had not thought about in years, buying new linens and dishes from the general store with money he had been saving for a new bull. He did not care about the expense, wanted everything to be perfect for Delilah. Jacob Owen and Gerald Blackthorne came back twice more, increasingly angry and threatening, but each time they were turned away by a combination of Doc Morrison's medical authority, Sheriff Wallace's growing suspicion about their behavior, and Samuel's quiet but unmistakable promise of violence if they did not leave Delilah alone. When they learned about the impending wedding, Blackthorne threatened legal action, but his threats rang hollow when Sheriff Wallace pointed out that a woman of 20 had every right to choose her own husband, guardian or no guardian. The wedding took place on a sunny September morning in the small church at the heart of Tascosa, with Doc Morrison giving Delilah away and Mrs. Callahan weeping throughout the ceremony. The altered dress fit perfectly, white lace and satin that made Delilah look like an angel, and Samuel could barely breathe when he saw her walking down the aisle toward him. The vows were simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion he possessed, promising silently to spend every day proving she had made the right choice. The small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony applauded, and someone played a fiddle as they walked back down the aisle together. Delilah's hand tucked into the crook of Samuel's arm, both of them grinning like fools. The journey to the Double Creek Ranch the next morning was nothing like Delilah's desperate flight from Amarillo. She rode beside Samuel on a gentle mare he had purchased for her, their supplies packed on a mule trailing behind, and the September weather had cooled enough to make the ride pleasant. Samuel found himself constantly looking over at her, still amazed that she was real, that she was his, that they had truly done this crazy, wonderful thing. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked, catching him staring yet again. "That I am the luckiest man in Texas," Samuel replied honestly. "And that I still cannot quite believe you said yes." "Where else was I going to go?" Delilah teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You ruined me for other men when you carried me 8 miles without complaint. Now I have impossibly high standards." Samuel laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "Well, I will do my best to maintain those standards, Mrs. Pierce." "I like the sound of that," Delilah said softly. "Mrs. Pierce, it feels like freedom." They reached the ranch in the late afternoon, and Samuel felt a flutter of nervousness as he helped Delilah down from her horse. The house was small, just 3 rooms, and suddenly he was seeing it through her eyes, worried it would not be enough, that she would regret leaving town for this isolated existence. But Delilah walked through the door and turned in a slow circle, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace and simple furniture, the kitchen area with the new dishes he had bought, the bedroom beyond with its wedding quilt that Mrs. Callahan had insisted they take, and her smile was genuine. "It is perfect," she said simply. "It is home." Something tight in Samuel's chest loosened at those words, and he pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her against him. "It is home now," he agreed. "Before, it was just a place I lived. But now, with you here, it is home." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless, discovering each other in the lamplight, learning what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp and cry out. Samuel had been with women before, brief encounters that had satisfied a physical need but left him feeling empty after. But this was different. This was connection, intimacy, the joining of not just bodies but souls. And when he finally fell asleep with Delilah curled against his side, her head on his chest, he felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. The next months established the rhythm of their life together. Delilah proved to be a natural ranch wife, throwing herself into learning everything from tending the kitchen garden to helping with the horses. She was not afraid of hard work, and Samuel found himself constantly impressed by her determination and capability. She also had a gift with numbers, and she took over managing the ranch accounts, discovering several areas where they could economize and invest more wisely. They worked side by side during the days, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, talking about everything and nothing, planning their future. Samuel told her about his dream of eventually running cattle drives to the railhead, maybe even expanding into horse breeding. Delilah shared her own dreams, tentative at first, about maybe starting a small school on the ranch for the children of the other ranchers in the area, giving them access to education without the long journey to Tascosa. Winter came, and with it, the harsh realities of ranch life in the Texas Panhandle. They huddled together for warmth on the coldest nights, and Samuel was grateful for every degree of cold that gave him an excuse to hold Delilah closer. She never complained, even when the work was backbreaking, even when the isolation of the ranch meant going weeks without seeing another soul besides each other and Martinez, who had his own small cabin on the far edge of the property. Spring brought the foaling season, and Delilah was there for every birth, staying up all night when necessary, learning to assist when the mares struggled. Samuel watched her croon to a frightened first-time mother, her hands gentle and sure as she helped guide the foal into the world, and he fell in love with her all over again. It was in late spring that Delilah began feeling ill in the mornings, and Samuel felt his heart leap with hope even as he tried not to assume. when Doc Morrison confirmed what they both suspected during a trip to Tascosa for supplies, that Delilah was carrying their first child. Samuel let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and swept his wife into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Careful, you will make me sick again," she scolded, but she was glowing with happiness, her hands already moving instinctively to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father," Samuel said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Delilah confirmed, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "Our baby, Samuel. Ours." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Samuel became almost comically overprotective, trying to prevent Delilah from doing any work he deemed too strenuous, which was nearly everything. She finally sat him down one evening and gently but firmly told him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that he needed to let her maintain some semblance of normalcy or she would lose her mind. "I just want to keep you safe," Samuel protested. "Both of you." "And I love you for that," Delilah said, taking his hands in hers. "But Samuel, you cannot wrap me in cotton and put me on a shelf for 6 months. I need to move to work to feel useful. I promise I will be careful, and I promise I will tell you if something feels wrong, but you have to trust me to know my own body." Samuel knew she was right, but it went against every protective instinct he possessed. Still, he agreed, though he remained hypervigilant, always watching for any sign of distress, always ready to leap in and take over whatever task she was doing. Summer brought the heat again, and Samuel found himself remembering that day he had found Delilah collapsed on the road, remembering the way she had felt in his arms, so light and vulnerable. Now she was healthy and glowing with pregnancy, her body changing to accommodate their growing child, and the difference filled him with fierce pride and gratitude. Jacob Owen made one final attempt to cause trouble in July, showing up at the ranch with Gerald Blackthorne and 2 hired guns, claiming that Delilah had been coerced into marriage and demanding she return to Amarillo. Samuel had been in the barn when they arrived, but he emerged at the sound of raised voices to find Delilah standing on the porch, one hand resting protectively on her now obvious belly, the other holding his rifle with surprising competence. "I will say this once more, Uncle," she said coldly. "I am married, I am pregnant, and I am happy. You have no claim on me, no power over me, and if you do not leave my property immediately, I will exercise my right to defend my home from trespassers." "You cannot mean that," Jacob Owen blustered, but he had paled at the sight of the rifle. "I absolutely mean it," Delilah replied. "You tried to sell me to a killer for money. You do not get to pretend you care about my welfare now. Leave and do not come back." Samuel had reached the porch by then, taking his place beside his wife, his own hand on his pistol. Martinez appeared from the barn, his shotgun cradled casually in his arms, and the 2 hired guns suddenly looked a lot less certain about the whole situation. "The lady has spoken," Samuel said quietly, "and I suggest you listen. Because if you do not, you will have to go through me, and I promise you that will not end well for anyone." For a long moment, the 2 groups faced off, tension crackling in the air. Then Blackthorne, seeing the determination in Delilah's face, the absolute certainty that she would pull that trigger if necessary, apparently decided his own skin was worth more than whatever money Jacob Owen had promised him. He turned his horse and rode away without another word. Jacob Owen followed, spitting curses but impotent now, defeated. Samuel waited until they were out of sight before gently taking the rifle from Delilah's trembling hands. She turned into his embrace, burying her face against his chest, and he felt the shudders running through her frame. "I meant it," she said, her voice muffled. "If they had tried to take me, I would have shot them." "I know," Samuel murmured, stroking her hair. "And I am proud of you, though I hope it never comes to that, but I think that is the end of it. They know you will not go back, that you have people who will protect you. They will give up now." And apparently they did, because summer faded into fall with no further incidents. The ranch prospered, the cattle thrived, and Delilah grew rounder with their child. Samuel had never been happier, had never imagined this kind of contentment was possible. The baby came in early November, during the first cold snap of the season. Doc Morrison had come out to the ranch 2 weeks earlier to stay in the guest room they had prepared, unwilling to risk being unable to reach them when Delilah went into labor. Samuel was grateful for his foresight when the pain started in the middle of the night and progressed quickly. He had thought he was strong, had thought he could handle anything, but listening to Delilah's cries of pain from the other side of the bedroom door nearly broke him. Martinez had to physically restrain him twice from barging in, reminding him that Doc Morrison knew what he was doing, and that Delilah needed to focus without worrying about Samuel's reaction. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the air, Samuel's knees went weak with relief. A moment later, Doc Morrison opened the door, grinning broadly. "You have a son," he announced. "A healthy, strong boy with a good set of lungs, and your wife is doing fine, though she is exhausted. You can come in now, Father." Samuel barely remembered crossing the room. His entire focus narrowed to the bed where Delilah lay propped against pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face pale and exhausted, and in her arms, wrapped in the blanket Mrs. Callahan had knitted, was the smallest person he had ever seen. "Samuel," Delilah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look at him. Look at our son." Samuel sank onto the edge of the bed, his hand shaking as he reached out to touch the tiny fist that had escaped the blanket. The baby's fingers wrapped around his index finger with surprising strength, and Samuel felt his heart expand in his chest, felt love so fierce and overwhelming that it stole his breath. "He is perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect, both of you." "Do you want to hold him?" Delilah asked, and Samuel nodded wordlessly. She placed their son in his arms, and Samuel cradled him with the same careful tenderness he had shown carrying Delilah that day on the road, acutely aware of how precious this burden was, how fragile and important. The baby opened his eyes, and Samuel found himself staring into blue eyes that reminded him of his wife's. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your papa, and I promise you that I will always keep you safe, that I will always be here when you need me. What should we name him?" Delilah asked softly. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the man who had saved Delilah's life by bringing her to Tascosa, about second chances and new beginnings. "What about Matthew?" he suggested. "Matthew David Pierce. It means gift of God, and that is what he is." "What you both are, Matthew," Delilah repeated, testing the name. "Matthew David Pierce. It is perfect." The winter passed in a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Samuel had thought he understood exhaustion from ranch work, but nothing had prepared him for the relentless demands of a newborn. Yet he would not have traded a single moment, not when Matthew's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, not when the baby smiled for the first time, not when Delilah would fall asleep mid-feeding and Samuel would take Matthew and walk him around the room, singing off key lullabies his mother had sung to him decades ago. Spring came again, bringing new life to the ranch. Matthew grew stronger every day, his personality beginning to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. Delilah thrived in motherhood, her confidence growing as she learned what worked and what did not. And Samuel fell more in love with her every time he saw her with their son. They celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after Matthew was asleep, reflecting on how much had changed in a single year. From strangers to spouses to parents, they had compressed a lifetime of experiences into 12 months, and somehow it had worked. More than worked, it had flourished. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked, her fingers intertwined with his across the table. "Taking a chance on me, marrying so quickly?" "Never," Samuel replied without hesitation. "Best decision I ever made, you." "Not for a single second," Delilah assured him. "You saved my life that day, Samuel. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." "We gave that to each other," Samuel corrected gently. "I was just existing before you, going through the motions. But now, everything has meaning. Everything matters." The years flowed past like water, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler, and then a bright, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch, already declaring his intention to be a cowboy, just like Papa. 2 years after Matthew, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who had her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes, and a stubborn streak that promised to keep them all on their toes. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Samuel expanded the herd and began breeding horses as he had dreamed, developing a reputation for quality stock. Delilah started her school, teaching the ranch children 3 days a week in the large room they added onto the house. She was a natural teacher, patient and creative, and the parents were grateful for the opportunity to give their children an education. Samuel never forgot how they had begun, never took for granted the woman who had literally fallen into his life. Every year on the anniversary of the day he found her on that road, he would present Delilah with a small gift, a reminder of how far they had come. The first year it was a simple leather-bound journal for her to record their life together. The second year, a silver locket with their photographs and strands of the children's hair. The third year, a painting he had commissioned of the 4 of them standing in front of the ranch house. When Matthew turned 8 and Grace was 6, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, the sickness lasting longer, the exhaustion more pronounced. Samuel worried constantly, despite Doc Morrison's assurances that everything was progressing normally, that sometimes pregnancies were just more difficult. "I am fine," Delilah insisted for the 1,000th time, but Samuel could see the weariness in her eyes, the way she moved more slowly, more carefully. "Let me take care of you," he pleaded. "The way you let me take care of you that first time." "You never stopped taking care of me," Delilah pointed out, but she allowed him to fuss, to do more than his share of the household work, to carry her to bed when she fell asleep in her chair after a long day. The baby, another boy they named Thomas, arrived healthy and strong in the spring, and Delilah's strength returned gradually. Samuel treasured these years, watching his children grow, working the land he loved alongside the woman who had become his entire world. Matthew proved to have a natural gift with horses, gentling even the most skittish colts with patience and understanding. Grace was brilliant at her studies, devouring every book Delilah could get her hands on and declaring her intention to become a doctor like Doc Morrison. Thomas was still too young to show his inclinations, but he was a happy child, content to toddle after his older siblings and get into whatever mischief they would allow. Samuel was 40 years old the year Grace turned 16 and announced that she had been accepted to a women's medical college in Philadelphia. The pride he felt warred with the fear of letting his daughter go so far away, but Delilah reminded him that they had raised her to be strong and independent, that they could not clip her wings now. "She is so young," Samuel protested weakly. She is the same age I was when I lost my parents and had to learn to survive, Delilah pointed out gently. And unlike me, she has a family who loves her, who will support her, who she can come home to whenever she needs. We have to let her fly, Samuel. So they did, though Samuel was not ashamed to admit he cried when they put Grace on the train east. But he was also fiercely proud, knowing that his daughter was brave enough to chase her dreams, secure in the love of her family. Matthew married at 22, bringing home a rancher's daughter from up north named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far edge of the Pierce property, and Matthew took over more and more of the daily operations as Samuel began, reluctantly, to slow down. Not retire, never retire, but to acknowledge that at 56 he could not work 16-hour days the way he had at 26. Thomas, it turned out, had inherited his mother's gift for teaching and his father's love of the land. He went to school in Austin to study agriculture and returned determined to help modernize the ranch while preserving its essential character. He brought new ideas about breeding programs and pasture rotation that increased their productivity while being gentler on the land. Grace returned from medical school with her degree and her new husband, a fellow doctor named Jonathan, and they opened a practice in Tascosa. She gave Samuel and Delilah 3 grandchildren in quick succession, all girls. And Samuel discovered that being a grandfather was somehow even better than being a father. Samuel was 63, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, his body bearing the marks of decades of hard work, when he and Delilah made their annual pilgrimage to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. They did this every year, riding out together to that stretch of road, remembering how their story had begun. "Can you believe it has been 32 years?" Delilah asked, her own hair now more silver than brown, her face lined but still beautiful to Samuel's eyes. "Some days it feels like yesterday," Samuel replied, pulling her close against his side as they stood looking at the dusty road. "Other days, I can barely remember what life was like before you." "We have had a good life," Delilah said softly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was walking this road, sure I was going to die." "The best life," Samuel agreed, "and we are not done yet, still got plenty of years left in us." Delilah laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 20. "Is that a promise, Cowboy?" "That is a promise, Mrs. Pierce," Samuel confirmed, kissing her temple. "I did not carry you 8 miles just to give up on you now." They stood there as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold, 2 people who had taken a chance on love and built something beautiful from it. They had raised children who grew into good, strong adults. They had built a ranch that would endure for generations. They had created a legacy of love and hard work and determination. But more than any of that, they had found each other. 2 souls that fit together perfectly despite the improbable circumstances of their meeting. And that, Samuel thought as he held his wife and watched the sun sink below the horizon, was the greatest achievement of all. The years continued to pass gently. Samuel and Delilah transitioned fully into retirement, letting Matthew run the ranch while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. They remained healthy and active into their 70s, still taking rides together, still sitting on the porch every evening to watch the sunset, still holding hands like newlyweds. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the decades. Doc Morrison, now 95 and still sharp as a tack, gave a toast about the day Samuel had carried Delilah into his office, about knowing immediately that he was witnessing something special. Martinez, retired but still living in his cabin on the Pierce property, spoke about watching their love story unfold, about how it had restored his own faith in romance after his own wife's death years before. But it was Matthew who brought the house down, presenting his parents with a gift from all the children. A bronze statue of a cowboy carrying a woman in his arms, commissioned from a local artist, to be placed at the spot where their story began. "Because we all exist because of that moment," Matthew said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because one man saw a woman in need and chose to carry her to safety, and in doing so, carried all of us into existence. We love you both, and we honor the courage and love that created this family." Samuel could not speak past the lump in his throat, so he simply held Delilah as she cried happy tears against his chest, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the living proof that love, real love, could conquer anything. They lived to see their 60th anniversary, their health finally beginning to fail in small ways, but their love for each other never diminishing. Samuel's joints ached on cold mornings, and Delilah's eyesight was not what it used to be. But they still managed their evening ritual, still found joy in each other's company, still considered themselves the luckiest people alive. Samuel passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, with Delilah beside him holding his hand just as she had that first night in Doc Morrison's office. His last words were, "I love you," and his last conscious thought was gratitude for the day he had found a collapsed woman on a dusty Texas road and made the decision that changed everything. Delilah followed him less than a year later, her children and grandchildren gathered around her as she slipped away with a smile on her face, heading toward whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that Samuel would be waiting. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Double Creek Ranch, with a headstone that read simply, "Samuel and Delilah Pierce. He carried her to safety. She carried his heart. Together they carried each other through a beautiful life." The bronze statue remained at the roadside, a landmark and a legend, and for generations after, people would stop to read the plaque at its base that told the story of the cowboy who carried a dying woman 8 miles to save her life and found his soulmate in the process. Children would ask their parents about it, and the parents would tell them about love and courage and taking chances, about how sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to set someone down, to carry them through their darkest moment, and trust that they will do the same for you when your own dark moments come. And the Double Creek Ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of the Pierce family, generation after generation, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and determination that Samuel and Delilah had built from nothing more than a chance encounter and a choice to care about a stranger. Their love story became legend in that part of Texas, told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but the heart of it remained true. Once upon a time, a cowboy carried a woman 8 miles without setting her down once, and that single act of heroism and compassion created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, rippling outward in ways they could never have imagined on that scorching August day in 1882. It was a story about rescue and love, about taking chances and holding on, about the extraordinary things that can grow from a single moment of courage and kindness. It was a story that proved love could bloom even in the harshest conditions, that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back, that the weight of another person in your arms can feel like the weight of your entire future, precious and perfect, and exactly what you needed even if you did not know you were searching for it. And it all began with a woman collapsing from exhaustion on a lonely Texas road, and a cowboy who decided that leaving her there was simply not an option, who gathered her into his arms and started walking, who carried her through heat and exhaustion to safety, and who in doing so carried both of them toward a love that would define the rest of their lives.